All right. Hey, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. This is actually our second start to all those people in our e-community. I forgot that I'm supposed to stop. And anyway, Shabbat Shalom. It's great to see you guys again. The weird thing is we have people here. It's so strange. I got used to just talking to the camera, and now we have people here. But it's such a blessing. It's wonderful to see everybody. And what we're celebrating today is Independence Day. And it's amazing how so often the things that I've been teaching through then coincide with what's happening on the Hebrew calendar. What's happening today, though, is of course something that's on the American calendar. We're celebrating our independence from Britain. Why did we not want to hang out with Britain anymore? Well, we felt that their ways were not true. They were not standing for liberty, and so we rebelled. And you can think what you want of that, but that's essentially the history. Well, what we're talking about today is the phenomenal time when we are going to celebrate freedom from Satan. You see, Satan is going to be imprisoned for 1,000 years. He's going to be thrown into the abyss. And we're going to take a look at this because we're really moving from Revelation 19 to Revelation 20. I know that's hard to believe. I'm excited as well. But we are moving into new territory. And so this is where Satan is going to finally get what he has coming. And you probably remember this guy, Hitler, really, really bad guy. I found this old newspaper clipping. This is from September 4th, 1939. So World War II started on September 1st, 1939. This is only 3 days later, and they're saying wanted for murder, for kidnapping, for theft, and for arson. This was only at the beginning of the war, and he was already wanted for this many things. We know that he was doing all kinds of terrible stuff before the beginning of the war, but then as the war went on, it got worse and worse and worse and worse. And so this, he says this reckless criminal is wanted, dead or alive. But of course, after the war, he had committed so many atrocities that it left people speechless. And of course, Satan is wanted as well. He's the guy that got everything off to the wrong start. He's wanted for deceiving those that he was supposed to protect. You recall that God created him as the most beautiful, the wisest of all. And he stationed him in the Garden of Eden. And he was supposed to protect that area, but he did not. Instead, he deceived Adam and Eve. He's wanted for treason against the king. Treason, yes, because he was commissioned to be part of God's kingdom, and he turned against the rightful king. For exploitation of his post in the Garden of Eden. He was put there. He was supposed to protect it and watch over it, and he took advantage of it. And then for slander of the king's character. He started saying things about God that were not true, but they were subtle, just little things against God's character. And then for trying to do a hostile takeover of the cosmos, which he was partly successful in, but we're going to see, of course, that he will not be completely successful. And then lastly, and for inciting the king's creatures to murder, theft, perversions, wars, genocide, a coup d'etat, etc. And this is just a small list of the things that Satan is wanted for. So when Satan is finally put in, it is going to be an amazing day. But you might say, well, why only 1,000 years? Shouldn't he get a whole lot more than that? Well, I remember this guy, Al Capone. Everybody knew that Al Capone was a mafia boss and that he had killed many people. But as it was, the legal authorities were not able to actually catch him for those particular crimes, and so they got him for tax evasion. And this, I think we're going to see a similar thing, that the dragon, that serpent of old, who was the devil and Satan, is going to be sentenced to 1,000 years. This is one of these big questions. Again, why doesn't Satan just, get thrown into the lake of fire right away? Because it's not part of God's justice system. God has a plan. It has to happen this way, that Satan would be put away for 1,000 years. It's partly to get rid of him, because this is the very least that he has coming, but it's also to give people in the millennium a chance to go back to the conditions of the Garden of Eden. So let's remember, who is Satan? He was the standard of perfection. Thus says the Lord God, you are the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. That verse 12, there's 6 words there. You were perfect. You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. 6 words describe who this individual was. He was the creme de la creme. He was the standard. You talk about perfection. He was the seal of perfection. That word there in Hebrew is the khatam, and it means to seal something. So after you would write a letter, and certainly in later days, they would take wax and they would put hot wax on it. Then they would put a seal on it so that it could not be tampered with. It was the last thing that you affixed to a scroll or to a letter so that it could not be changed. So if he's the seal of perfection, that means that you can't change perfection. He's as perfect as you can get. There's no way to improve upon how perfect he was. He was also Malay Chokhmah. He was full of wisdom. So if you have a glass and you pour water into it, when it gets to that point where it starts to overflow, that's how full he was. You could not squeeze any more water in that cup. You could not squeeze any more wisdom in Satan because he was full of wisdom. And he was perfect in beauty. Not 95% perfect, not 98% perfect, but 100% perfect. And so he looked at himself in the mirror and said, wow, I really am all that. I'm amazing. So God is the most beautiful. Satan, I don't know how close of a second he is, but he's super, super, super close. God has all wisdom, and yet Satan is full of wisdom. God is perfect in beauty, and yet Satan is perfect in beauty. God created a being so like himself, in certain ways, mind you. In some ways, he was completely deficient. And that's what we're going to see, is that on the outward expression, he had it all. And yet, the things that he was given by God were gifts. He did nothing to earn them. He did nothing to deserve them. In other words, he had nothing to boast about. That he was the seal of perfection, big deal, God gave him that. That he was full of wisdom, big deal, God gave him that. And that he was perfect in beauty, big deal, God gave him all of those qualities. And it says, you were in Eden, the garden of God. You recall that Adam and Eve were in Eden. And so he was charged with taking care of those in that place. We also know that he was on the mountain of God. You were the anointed cherub who covers. I established you. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked back and forth in the midst of the fiery stones. If we compare this language, we find it in Isaiah 14. He said, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars, the angels of God. I will also sit on the mountain of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. Comparing again with Psalm 48. In the city of our God, in his holy mountain, beautiful in elevation, the joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion on the sides of the north, the city of the great King. So Satan had access both to the Garden of Eden and to the city of God. He had complete access. Another great passage from Hebrews 12:22. You've come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, to the heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels. What is this mountain of God that we see here? It is the new Jerusalem. It's the new Jerusalem. Satan had complete access to the new Jerusalem, to the Garden of Eden. He was this mediator. He would go between. He was supposed to be a type of high priest, and I taught on that back in Revelation chapter 12. He was supposed to be a type of high priest, an intermediary, someone who was to protect those in that place. And God says, you were perfect in your ways from the day you were created, till iniquity was found in you. This word here, avlata, is to deviate from and hence to do what is opposite of the character of God. God is love, 1 John 4:8. And there is no greater love than to give your life for another, Jesus said in John 15:13. The bottom line is that Satan did not want to be a servant. He's look, I'm the seal of perfection. I am full of wisdom. I'm perfect in beauty. Why should I, who am so glorious, serve anybody who is lesser than myself? And yet we see in God's kingdom, he says, if anyone desires to be first, he shall be last of all and be servant of all. You remember that Jesus said, if I then your Lord and teacher have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet, for I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. And lastly, in Philippians 2, but he made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant, and coming in the likeness of men, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself. Satan had all of the outward qualities. They were gifts from God. He was amazing. He was smart. He was beautiful. You couldn't do better than Satan as far as looks and IQ. And yet the one thing that he was required to do, to be like God, he refused to do. It's very sad. He wanted the praise without serving others. Your heart was proud because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom on account of your splendor. He didn't see himself correctly. For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven and exalt my throne above the stars of God. I'll sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. He refused to be a servant. You see, in Satan's kingdom, lording over others is the norm. But in God's kingdom, it's serving others. Now, this is where people say, well, what do you mean by serving people? Like, kind of like a slave? Well, to some degree, yes, but it doesn't mean that we just become a slave. Jesus wasn't a slave. He was the king. And yet, as the king, what did he do? He served others. He sacrificially served others. He served others when he did not have to serve others, when it was not expected that the king would serve another. This is really the epitome of love. Because it's easy to say, I love you to somebody, and then to do nothing for them. 1 John tells us that if someone comes and they're hungry, say, go and be warmed. God bless you. But we don't do anything to help that person. We haven't done anything. And this is where God is calling us. That if we want to be free, if we want to celebrate our independence, our freedom, our liberty, we have to die to ourselves. And I'll be quite honest with you. When I think about dying to myself, I don't get excited. Because dying to myself means that there's that some part of me that I think, oh man, this is awesome. I want to keep going this direction. And yet, I realize that I'm serving myself. It feels good for a while. It seems right for a spell. But ultimately, I need to deny myself. Now again, there's lots of different ideas about what it means to deny yourself. Does this mean I have to go become a monk? Or I've got to stand on one foot for 5 years and deny myself? Is that what we're talking about? There was a whole movement in the 300s and 400s, 500s, and those general time, of this ascetic movement where they thought that anything material was bad. We're not talking about that. We're not saying that it's wrong to have money or it's wrong to have a car or that it's wrong to own a house or to have things, even nice things. It's not wrong to have those. But what happens is those things begin to own us. Those experiences that we think are so amazing and so necessary begin to own us. And so we have to learn to die to ourselves. This is really what God's kingdom is all about. And it's scary at first because it doesn't sound like fun. It doesn't sound natural. It's very anti-culture, and it's not apparent on the face of it all. And yet, this is what God is calling us to do. Jesus said, the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who are great exercise over them. Yet it shall not be so among you. But whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. And whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. When we compare and contrast Satan and Yeshua, we find that they're completely the opposite. And yet, when God created Satan, again, he created him as the seal of perfection, full of wisdom, perfect in beauty. And when we look at the stones that covered him, they weren't just nice, pretty decorations. If actually we look at the Septuagint, we find that there are 12 stones, where there's only 9 in the Masoretic text. And what that suggests is that the 12 stones were just like the 12 stones on the high priest's ephod, and that he was a type of high priest. And it also says that you are the anointed cherub, the mimshach. Same word as Messiah. Like, wait, how can he be anointed? Well, he was anointed for a special purpose. God called him to be a anointed, someone who would be in charge of part of God's kingdom. You remember the story of Joseph and Pharaoh. Pharaoh had a bad dream. Joseph was in jail. Well, one day the butler says, oh yeah, I forgot. When I was in jail, there was this kid there that told me what my dreams meant. Forgive me, Pharaoh, but he might be able to help you. And so they sent for him at once. And Joseph interpreted the dreams, and he says, here's what you need to do, Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said, you're the guy. He said, only this throne will stand between me and you, but you will be Lord over Egypt. He was Lord over Egypt. Only Pharaoh, because of his throne, was higher. So what that meant is that Joseph had all the rights and prerogatives and authority and power to make decisions, to enforce those decisions, and he didn't have to go back to Pharaoh for every decision that he made. He had autonomy. He could do things without telling Pharaoh his every move. He was anointed in that position. But now imagine that if Pharaoh should have a child, his child would still be Lord over Joseph. Even though Joseph had all this authority and all this might and responsibility, the heir of Pharaoh would still rank higher. And in the same way, God gave Satan really the office of prime minister, of vizier. He was the one who had power over it all, and yet it was a throne, God's throne, that he was still the rightful king, and his heir, Yeshua, the Son of God, would still rank higher, always rank higher than Satan. And Satan, who had been given all of this power, all of this might, all of the authority, the responsibility, and the beauty, and the wisdom, which were gifts. He did nothing to earn those. They were gifts. And the one thing that he needed to do was to be a servant to those lesser than him, which was everybody. Because everybody ranked less in intelligence and beauty and office and authority. And yet he decided not to be a servant. He decided to flip it so that those on top are the ones he thought should be served. They should be worshiped. And yet God says, no, that's not how my kingdom works. Whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. And whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. And so it was God himself, God incarnate, Emmanuel, the Son of God, who did what Satan refused to do. He came and he humbled himself as a bondservant. It says that he emptied himself. He washed feet. And then he was even willing to go to the cross, to die, to show that sacrificial love. And guys, I really believe this is so important for us today. Are we willing to die to ourselves? To die to the causes that we think are absolutely important? It's amazing what has been happening over the last 3 or 4 months. We're so divided. We can't stand divided. We have to stand united. And the only way to do that is that we're going to decide that we're going to love each other. I may disagree with your perspective on that topic. You may disagree with my perspective on such and such a topic, but that's okay. This is how we learn to love each other sacrificially. We don't have to have the same opinions about every topic. And if we would take time and listen to one another, we might discover that, hey, you've got a point there. I never thought about that. And if you listen to my viewpoint, you might say, wow, I never thought about that. And we might learn from one another. But the only way to do it is if we're willing to humble ourselves and to sacrificially love each other. Because if we're not willing to do that, whose side are we really on? Whose side are we really on? What does love look like? Right? We're told to love our neighbor as ourselves. We recite that every week. Right? Shema Yisrael, Adonai Echad, Adonai Eloheinu. Right? Adonai Echad. And then it says that you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So somebody asked Jesus, well, who is my neighbor after all? Think about this, guys. Who is your neighbor? You might say, well, my neighbor is somebody who's in the same political party as me. My neighbor is somebody who also worships on Shabbat. My neighbor is somebody who also thinks that, pork isn't so great on the menu. My neighbor is somebody who's in the same socioeconomic category as I am. My neighbor is somebody of the same color as me. My neighbor is somebody who has the same position as I do about the current conflicts we're having about racism, Black Lives Matter, and all these things. That's my neighbor. That's not what Jesus said. That's not what Jesus said. He was asked, who's my neighbor? And so he told the story of the Good Samaritan. We all know the story. It's one of those classic stories that we learn. But have we put it here? We might know it because we learned it in Shabbat school or Sunday school, whatever you were doing years ago. But do we really live it? Do we practice that? You know the story. There was a man from Jerusalem who was going down to Jericho, and he got overtaken by some robbers. And he lay there, not dead, but pretty close. He couldn't move. And sometime a Levite comes along. Doesn't do anything, just leaves him there. One of his own countrymen leaves him there on the side of the road. Leaves him for dead. Then a priest comes along and then leaves him there for dead. These are the guys that had pretty similar views on politics, views on the Bible, views on how the law should be interpreted. They were probably pretty close. And then this guy, the Samaritan, comes along who has radically different views, who's like, oh, a Jew, I disagree with him on many theological issues. I disagree with him about where the center of our religion ought to be. They say it's in Jerusalem. We know that's not true. We know it's in Samaria. They didn't agree politically. They did not have the same genetic heritage. They were against each other on racial issues. There was a huge bias between them. And when the Samaritan came to the man, he says, look, I'm willing to help you as long as you're willing to change your perspective on these things, right? If you're willing to repent of Jerusalem being the capital and Samaria, then I'll help you. And if you're willing to repent of thinking that your Torah is better than our Torah, then I'll help you. Did he do those things? No. Did he say, look, we have to get together on these political issues? He didn't do those things. You know why? Because he wasn't concerned about those things. Because he said, this is my neighbor. And yeah, I still disagree with my neighbor. I still disagree with him theologically. I still disagree with him politically. I still disagree with him eschatologically. I still disagree with him about ethnic issues. They never resolved those issues. They didn't, come and say, man, I'm so glad that I was able to help you because now you really are on my side. It didn't happen. So far as we know, they remained at odds with each other on those issues. And yet, the Samaritan, whom the Jews hated, helped that man. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't try to convert him to his perspective. He just loved him. He loved him. And it just breaks my heart, guys, when I see fights happening online. I see fights happening in our midst, in our congregation, about these different issues. And it's okay to have your perspective on it, really. But let's not hate each other. Because when we do that, who are we acting like? Are we acting like Yeshua? Or are we acting like Satan? We're acting like Satan. It was for that purpose of overcoming Satan that Yeshua came. That he came to give his life as a ransom for many. So that when Satan is finally thrown into the abyss, we can rejoice. Why are we going to rejoice? Because we have been made like Yeshua. We've learned to live and to love like Yeshua. We've learned to stop competing with one another. We've learned to stop judging each other. Doesn't mean that we accept everything is true and everything is okay, but we've learned that, you know what? God's good. God is the judge. I'm going to live the way he told me to live. I'm going to stand for biblical principles, not for these other things. The characteristics of Satan's kingdom, of his kingdom, are the exact opposite of God's kingdom. Really, this, I think, is the easiest way to look at it. On the left, we have the strongest lords over the subject. Satan is at the top. This is his view of right versus God's view, where the strongest, who is at the top, the strongest serves his subjects. God's view of right. We have to decide, which kingdom am I going to be part of? Which kingdom? Because we can have our theological points. We can even have correct theology and lousy practice. Good theology, but no implementation. So many times the Pharisees had the right theology, but they had the wrong practice. Jesus said, listen to them when they're in Moses' seat and they're teaching. Listen to what they say, but don't do what they do. Their theology is true, but their practice is terrible. He did not chastise them for bad theology by and large. sometimes, but by and large he didn't. It was because their practice was not commensurate with God's kingdom. We somehow have made theology the litmus test of whether you're really a true believer. Tell me about your theology. So you believe in the virgin birth, okay. You believe that Jesus died and rose again, okay. You believe that he's coming again, okay. But doesn't Satan believe all those things? In fact, doesn't he know all those things? He's not in denial about those things. He knows history. He knows what happened. And he knows Jesus is coming again. He's read the Bible. He's not stupid. He's full of wisdom, right? He knows. He's no idiot. So it's not about bad theology per se. It's about not taking that theology, this study of God, and really putting it into practice. Satan is brilliant. He deceived us, and he continues to do that to deceive ourselves. Remember back in Genesis, he said this great line, "Has God indeed said?" Wow, that was a good one. Wow, that's so effective. So effective. Because what he did is he slandered God's character. He questioned what God said. And he says, you will not surely die. That was, of course, a bold-faced lie. But then he mixes it. He mixes truth. For God knows your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. That is true. That is true. For it says, God says, now look, man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. So it was true what he said, but that's the trouble, is that he mixes the truth with the lie. And we are in such an age where we have different news things coming at us. It's imperative that each of us go back and check the sources. Just like Adam and Eve should have gone back and said, wait a second, you're giving me a little news clip here, and part of what you're saying is true, but the other part isn't true. And boy, do we fall victim to this. We read something, it looks pretty true. You know why we believe it? Because it is already reinforcing the beliefs that we have about something. It's reinforcing the beliefs that we have about something. And you could just pick your topic. You could just pick your topic and you will find that there is a meme out there or there's a news story and it's telling you, this or that. I mean, there's all kinds of news stories that are happening about COVID, happening about Black Lives Matter, and some of them are partially true, some of them have these other things. We have to go back. So before you repost that, before you share it with all of your friends and say, this is absolutely true, this is what's happening, you have to go back and check your sources. I don't know of any shortcut. I wish there were. I wish that every news story that ever came out was absolutely 100% factual, but it's not. You know why? Because everybody has a bias. Everyone has an agenda that they're trying to push. And it's on the right and it's on the left. Don't think just because, I'm a Republican, we don't do that stuff. Yes, we do. It's not only the liberal Dems that are doing that stuff. The right has just as much false information out there. We have to go back. We have to check the sources. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. So what Satan did is he got them to curse themselves via the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the flesh, and pride. And so then, because of that, God simply pronounced the curse that they brought upon themselves. What we just read today about Balak, that he sent messengers to Balaam, the son of Beor, to call him, saying, please come at once, curse this people for me. For I know that whom you bless is blessed, and whom you curse is cursed. And you recall that Balaam tried and tried and tried, but he couldn't. He really wanted the money, but he couldn't curse Israel. Why? Because Israel was blessed. Israel was blessed, and he could not curse them. Every time he tried, a blessing came out. And God said, look, man, they wanted to curse you. I turned it around for a blessing. Isn't that great? Yeah, go God. And yet, Balaam still had a victory. How did he do it? Because he got Israel to buy into the lie, and they, by their own actions, cursed themselves. They cursed themselves. And it says that the young ladies came and they invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. So Israel was joined to Baal of Peor. The anger of the Lord was aroused against Israel. Satan cannot come up against you with a gun and just go boom, boom. He cannot do that, spiritually speaking. What he does is he comes up to you and says, hey, check out this fancy gun. Put it up to your head. Nothing's going to happen. Just try it. You won't die. And you're like, really? Boom. Oh, right? That's what happens. And then God comes along and says, what's going on here? And Satan says, I don't know. I didn't do anything. I just gave him a gun and said, see what happens. And he pulled the trigger. Am I to blame for that? That's how he gets us, is that he gets us to kill ourselves. And so it is going to be so exciting when Satan is finally put away. Guys, we have to understand the wiles of the devil. We have to understand his machinations and his schemes. We have to go back and check our political sources, our news sources. We have to go back and check our biblical sources. In case you haven't noticed, I'm kind of a stickler for giving you lots of scripture. Why do I do that? So that you can go back and check. So that you can see that I've actually done my homework, that I've given you 4 or 5 scriptures that say the same thing about this topic. I hope you continue to be a Berean and go back, you go home, and you check those sources. And you can see that it's not just one verse lifted out of context, but it's many verses, all with a similar kind of context, a similar message, so that you can have that assurance and the confidence that, okay, man, we've got 3 witnesses on this particular doctrine. We've got 4 witnesses, 5 witnesses. They're all saying the same thing. And then you can establish that this has to be true. If I believe the Bible to be true, then I got 5 scriptures that are all saying the same thing. I feel pretty confident that that's true. That's how you do it. You have to go back to the source and say, who's telling me this? What authority do they have to tell me this information? It's no different when you come to a news source or a political slant or whatever it may be. Who's telling me this? What authority do they have to tell me this information? And what's their motive? What is their motive? And that's what was so insidious about Satan. What was so insidious about him is that he had the authority, he had the position, and so they had every reason to believe that he was telling them the truth. And yet, what he told them did not square with what the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords had told them personally. That's the trouble. This is how we get in trouble. As we say, well, this news agency, they wouldn't lie to me, would they? This person who just posted this thing or forwarded it to me, they wouldn't lie about this. And this is why you have to go back and say, okay, the person that forwarded me this message, do they really know? Yeah, they may not. So then you go and look at their source. What is their source? Who is this person? How do they know this? What authority do they have on this topic? What is their motive on this topic? Maybe they're not trying to lie to me, but maybe they themselves don't know. And so we have to go back to the source. And if you cannot do that, then you have to say, you know what? This is an interesting little thing that you sent me, but I'm going to put it to the side for now because I'm not able to verify this as being true. And don't forward it and don't believe it. Just kind of tuck it away and say, I'm going to just consider that one in the future. So It will be wonderful when Satan is finally put away. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the key to the bottomless pit. This is amazing. The tables are going to finally be turned. We saw in Revelation 9 that a star fallen from heaven to earth, to him was given the key to the bottomless pit. Satan and his team were able to open up that abyss. But Jesus tells us in Revelation 1, I am he who lives and was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore. Amen. And I have the keys of Hades and of death. How did Yeshua do that? Because he was willing to come and to die for us and to undo what Satan had done. You see, Satan had the power to instill fear. It says that Yeshua came inasmuch as the children have partaken of flesh and blood. He himself, Yeshua, likewise shared in the same, that through death he might destroy him who had the power of death, that is, the devil, and release those who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. That is what Yeshua has done for us. Why was this significant? Because Satan gained the upper hand. When he lied to Adam and Eve, he gained the authority over the planet. And the devil said to him, all this authority I will give to you, Jesus, and their glory, for this has been delivered to me, and I give it to whomever I wish. He swindled Adam and Eve, fair and square, if you might say, right? He swindled them good, but he swindled them. And he gained authority over the planet. And then he says, I will give it to you, Jesus, if you'll just bow down. We see other passages. Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world has been cast, it will be cast out. Jesus is confirming that, yes, indeed, Satan was the ruler. To open their eyes in order to turn them from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, Acts 26:18. Whose minds the God of this age has blinded, 2 Corinthians 4:4. Colossians 1:13, he has delivered us from the power of darkness and conveyed us into the kingdom of the Son of his love. 1 John 5:19, the whole world lies under the sway of the wicked one. Satan indeed had authority. And then we recall that we studied in Revelation 5. I saw on the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll written inside and on the back, sealed with 7 seals. The Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has conquered. Thus he can open the scroll and its 7 seals. Yeshua, through his death, was able to regain the authority over the planet. And so that we're no longer subject to Satan and his whims. And the exciting thing is that this time, it'll be Satan who gets arrested. Recall at the death of Jesus that he was arrested. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold of the dragon, the serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan. This word here, kateo, means of taking into custody or to arrest, to apprehend somebody, to arrest them. Satan will get arrested. This is what happened to John the Baptist. Herod laid hold of him and bound him, put him in prison. And then concerning Jesus, when they sought to lay hands on him, they feared the multitudes because they took him for a prophet. And they plotted to take Jesus by trickery and kill him. And then on the night of his betrayal, his betrayer had given them a sign saying, whomever I kiss, he is the one, seize him. But Jesus said to him, friend, why have you come? Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and took him. The same word is being used there. Yeshua was arrested, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, who came to willingly, sacrificially give his life for us. And now that same action will be executed upon Satan. He will be arrested. They're going to lay hands on him, and he's going to be thrown into prison. Hallelujah for that day. We see that Satan and his crew are going to be arrested. They're going to be cast into the abyss. Then the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet. These two were cast alive into the lake of fire burning with brimstone. In Daniel chapter 7, I watched till the beast was slain and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame as the for the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives are prolonged for a season and for a time. I'm going to talk about that in a future study, about the timing and what that has to do. But we see in Isaiah chapter 24, it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord will punish on high the host of exalted ones, and on the earth, the kings of the earth, they will be gathered together as prisoners are gathered in the pit, the bore, the abyss, it's the same word, and they'll be shut up in the prison, and after many days they will be punished. In Isaiah 14, yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest depths of the pit, or the bore, or the abyss. Satan is going to be cast in there. And of course, in Revelation chapter 20, it says, he laid hold of the dragon, the serpent of old, who was the devil, and Satan bound him for 1,000 years. And he cast him into the bottomless pit, or the abyss, and shut him up. This will be his time of going into prison. He will go into that place that he did not want to go. In fact, when he's thrown in there, he will be mocked by the very ones that he was ruling over. It says in Isaiah 14, hell, or Sheol, from beneath is excited about you, to meet you at your coming. It stirs up the dead, the Rephaim, for you. Probably Nephilim at this case, or some type of other leaders. All the chief ones of the earth, it is raised up from their thrones, all the kings of the nations. They all shall speak and say to you, have you also become as weak as we? Have you become like us? Your pomp is brought down to Sheol, and the sound of your stringed instruments, the maggot is spread under you, and worms cover you. How you were fallen from heaven, O Halel, or Lucifer, son of the morning. How you were cut to the ground, you who weakened the nations. So they remind him of all the things that he boasted about. He was going to be the greatest. He was going to exalt his throne above God. He was going to sit on the mountain of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. He would ascend above the heights of the clouds and be like the Most High, and yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest depths of the pit. They're going to remind him of all of his boasting, that he will be brought down. Not just him, but the fallen angels with him, the angels that sinned in the days of Noah, the angels that have followed him ever since then. We see concerning this place of Tartarus, this lowest depths of the pit, that they're going to be locked up in chains of utter darkness to be kept until the judgment. We see this also in Luke chapter 8, when they went to the country of the Gadarenes, which is opposite Galilee, and when Yeshua stepped out of the land, there met him a certain man from the city who had demons for a long time. When he saw Yeshua, he cried out and fell down before him, and with a loud voice said, "What have I to do with you, Yeshua, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." Yeshua asked him, saying, "What is your name?" And he said, "Legion," because many demons had entered him. And they begged him that he would not command them to go out into the abyss. So this abyss is where Satan is going to be thrown. It's a prison. There's chains of utter darkness in that place. We don't know entirely what it's going to be like, but it will not be a very nice place. Let's put it that way. And he will be there for 1,000 years. Jude says concerning these bad angels, you also know that the angels who did not keep within their proper domain but abandoned their own place of residence, he's kept in eternal chains. This is talking about the quality, not the time, that these chains never wear out. They're in these chains, eternal chains, in utter darkness, locked up for the judgment of the great day. And so again, this is telling us some details about what the abyss is going to be like. When Yeshua had died and he was put in the tomb, they were concerned that the body would be stolen, and so they sealed it. And it's in the same way, Satan is going to be sealed, and they set a seal on him so that he should deceive the nations no more till the 1,000 years were finished. But after these things, he must be released for a little while. In the same way that Yeshua's tomb was made secure, sealing it, and the stone is setting the guard. So Satan's going to be put in a seal will be put over so that he cannot get out. So all the things that were happening to Yeshua, he was arrested, he was put in a tomb, he was sealed. So too, Satan will be arrested. He'll be thrown in, and then a seal will be put over that place so that he cannot come out. You get this impression that Satan was trying to murder Jesus, obviously, to arrest him, then murder him, and then to keep him in the ground. And yet, he was not able. Yeshua came back. And so Satan is going to be denied the access to the restored garden. The Garden of Eden, the sacred places that he was specifically charged with overseeing, we see that it says that you defiled your sanctuaries. The word sanctuaries is mikdeshecha, the same as kadosh. I'm going to skip some of that. But he was supposed to take care of this place. And so this is why we can rejoice. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you having great wrath because he knows he has a short time. If people rejoiced when he got kicked out of heaven, how much more will we rejoice when he is put into the abyss? It's going to be wonderful. This restoration of Eden, the marriage, now when God is going to dwell with man, and we're going to come into this place where there are pleasures forevermore at his right hand. The Garden of Eden is the garden of pleasures. We're going to have all these things restored to us. Let us be glad and rejoice and give him glory, for the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his wife has made herself ready. Blessed are those who are called to the marriage supper of the Lamb. And he said to me, these are the true sayings of God. Hallelujah. We look forward to that day. Yeshua is going to reestablish the garden where God and man dwell together. Satan was the one who was instrumental in separating the two so that we could not be with God. Oh, he's wanted, all right. He's wanted for slander. He's wanted for incitement of God's creatures. He's wanted for all the things that he's done over the years, and he's going to get a sentence. That won't be the end of the story, mind you, but we'll get to that. But we will rejoice when Satan is finally cast in, and then we can continue with the marriage supper of the Lamb, where we become one with our groom, where we know his heart, we know his thoughts, we know how he acts, and we're going to act the same way. We're going to have this commingling of him and us. It's going to be such a wonderful time to be with Yeshua. If you have never put your trust in Yeshua, today is the day so that you can be with him when he comes back, so that you can be in his kingdom. I'm just going to lead us in a prayer, and just pray these simple words. Yeshua, forgive me for breaking your laws and for pursuing Satan's kingdom, for believing his lies instead of your truth. Forgive me and bring me into your kingdom. Make me a part of your family. In your wonderful name, amen. And I'd love to leave you with this. But before I do this, I just want to say, if you need prayer this morning, please come forward. I'd love to pray with you. God's good. He's so, so good. He cares about us. He knows that we're made of dust. He remembers that. He's not going to leave us orphans. He is coming again. This blessing, the Lord will bless you and keep you. The Lord will make his face shine upon you and will be gracious to you. The Lord will lift up his countenance upon you and will give you peace. Yevarecha Adonai ve'yishmerecha. Ya'eh Adonai panav elecha v'yichunecha. Yisa Adonai panav elecha ve'yisem lecha shalom. May the Lord bless you and keep you. God bless you. Shabbat shalom. Shavua tov. God bless.